part 8764 of me missing going to school. Does anyone want to talk about the yellow wallpaper with me before I force somebody to sit through a presentation and talk about why it's so important?
Hi everyone. So no one wanted to talk about the yellow wallpaper with me. So here's a presentation that I made like a couple days ago and you're going to sit and talk about it. So let's enjoy, sit back and relax. I put the link to this article for free down in the description below if you want to print it out, if you want to follow along, do so. And we're going to talk about it and talk about how important it is in mental health, women's health, and modern medicine and everything under the sun. So, our four key points that we're going to talk about is the author, our women's health, the yellow wallpaper in general, and just our impact on it today. So, Charlotte Perkins Gilman, our girl, our author, she was born July 3rd, 1860, and died on 8/17. It's actually my birthday in 1935. She was a feminist, a novelist, an essayist, and a philosopher. She gave birth to her only daughter, Catherine, in 1885, and soon went to a depressive state shortly after, which today we can understand that she was just going through postpartum depression or psychosis, but we'll get there later. She went under the practice of Dr. Silas Wire Mitchell. He was born on February 15th, 1829, died on January 4th, 1914. A well known neurologist who gained a fascination while serving in the Civil War as a physician and was the creator of the more now ineffective rest cure. And you're probably like, Trin, what the hell is the rest cure? Wonder no longer. The rest cure is a 6 to 8 week treatment that consisted of full on isolation, breast, force feeding, electrotherapy, and massage added to counteract muscle atrophy. So, literally, this woman over here, she's sitting and resting for 24 hours of a day for months at a time. Can you imagine? Can you imagine sitting in your bed for months, and months? Before I even get into this, if you like this story, if you read this whole thing, because it's only about 10 pages, it's a very short story, and a quick little summer read. If you're into that, you'll like The Rest of Relaxation, My Year of Rest and Relaxation, one of my favorite books by Otessa Moshfegh, my favorite author. Anything else that people would like from reading this story? I don't know. We'll get into that later. Visits from family and friends were forbidden. And electrotherapy, massage, sponge baths were with a rough rub using wet sheets and frequent feedings. The diet consisted of milk alone for the first week. Or if milk was not tolerated, 18 raw or more raw eggs. Can you imagine being forced 18 raw eggs? I think I would lose them. I would throw up, quite honestly. So, when Gilman was prescribed this same cure, which again, the rest cure was exclusively prescribed for women, she had this cure from a prognosis of a word that they loved to use back in before modern medicine, hysteria, which is, you know, exclusively used for women as well. The word hysteria was a term exclusively used for women solely the ones suffering from emotional disturbances, anxiety, or more excitability, things of that nature. These conceived notions of women's health uh, consisted of basically manipulative rhetorics that suggests that anything or any deviation from the public sphere were cause ramifications in society for women, which is nowhere near the truth. Nowhere, you couldn't be any further from the truth. And you have to think, I'm sitting here telling you about all this stuff that I learned and I read, and if it weren't for women hundreds of years ago who was like, I want to talk about books. I want to go to school. I want to vote. I want to put my political opinion matters and I want that to be on the ballot. I want that to show on the ballot. I would not be here telling you about these things now.
You have to understand at this point in history, men only believed that women were energetically capable of doing two things, and anything outside of those two things will be considered physically damaging to women. And those two things were menstruation and childbearing. So imagine women in that time who were menstruating and childbearing. I was like, man, this book looks pretty good. And they're like, stick to what you know. It reminds me of that quote that Gaston said in Beauty and the Beast.
It's not right for a woman to read. Soon she starts getting ideas and thinking.
Can you imagine? It'd be a whole Handmaid's Tale thing. We are kind of getting closer into what feels like a dystopian society, but that's why you gotta vote, people. Register to vote this year, not the next one, this year. Let's just say hysteria was a blanket diagnosis for anything men found unmanageable in women's health. Next, this is actually a snippet from Charlotte Perkins Gilman's article on why she actually wrote it. And she said, for many years I suffered from a severe and continuous nervous breakdown tending to melancholia and beyond. She suffered from breast cancer, and as a woman who took very much control of her life, she also took control of her death. She suffered from breast cancer for a long time, as well as her mental illnesses, and she believed in euthanasia and took chloroform and basically committed suicide. Uh, Later on, this has more depth to the story, but I just want to tell you how she died and what happened to her. So, back to this. This wise man put me to bed and applied the rest cure. Sent me home with solemn advice to live as domestic a life as far as possible, to have but 2 hours in intellectual life a day, and never touch a pen, brush, or pencil again as long as I lived. Now, think about that. Imagine you go in to try to get yourself evaluated for mental illnesses, and you're told, hey, you know what? For as long as possible, you only have 2 hours to read, write, watch TV, go outside, work out, do whatever. 2 hours. After that, nothing. You don't do anything but lay in your bed and do nothing. That would actively make me lose my mind more. So, when she was told this by Mitchell, she went home and did this for not that much. Because, maybe I think you would have me at least after 2 days of me doing only 4 hours of intellectual work in those 2 days, and the rest of those, 44 hours, you're just laying? No, absolutely not. This is what she said. Then, using the remnants of intelligence that remained and helped by a wise friend, I cast the noted specialist's advice to the winds and went to work again. Work. The normal life of every human being. Work, in which is joy and growth and service, without which one is a pauper and a parasite, ultimately recovering from some measure of power. So, which gives us the yellow wallpaper and why it was made.
You also have to note, and I forgot to mention this, that even though Charlotte Perkins Gilman had a very mentally challenging life, she still had a very fulfilling one. Like I mentioned in the beginning, Charlotte Perkins Gilman has done so many accomplishments in her life. On top of being a feminist and being a philosopher, she ran her own column called The Forerunner. She has made other works outside of the yellow wallpaper and has chosen the life of informing women on their own financial dependence and marriage roles and roles amongst men and women at the same time. So I say this to say this: whatever you're going through mentally, it's still possible to have a fulfilling life and enjoying it in the small pockets that you can.
Right. So, to anyone who hasn't read this story, there is a bit of a timeline of insanity that I just kind of wanted to condense. So, with our main character who remains unnamed, she starts at the arrival, the isolation, the understanding, the ownership, and freedom of this whole wallpaper and her relationship with it. So, we start at the arrival. This unnamed protagonist is diagnosed the rescuer with her husband John, who is also a physician, and stays in a large room with a peculiar wallpaper, left with tracking her thoughts in a diary, which she is prohibited to write in, by the way. If you read this story, you can see the writing style is set up as that is actually like a diary. Like one of the entries, if I'm not mistaken, is like, "Oh, here comes John. He can't see me like this." It's something like that. And if this had any collection, if you had to gain one understanding about women's health and how it's been perceived in this time, this quote here will just tell you all about it. I'm going to paraphrase it though. John is a physician, and perhaps that is one reason I do not get well faster. Because you're going to understand that, like most marriages, they consist of many dynamics. This one, the relationship our main character has with her husband, is just not an endearing one at all. Like, when I'm reading the story, and if you read the story, you'll see that John calls his wife like little goat, little girl. There's a couple darlings and dears in there, but it's just like it doesn't seem, it just makes me feel a little icky. I can't lie. I can't. I fear it's just not the most comforting feeling. So in Mitchell's findings on the success of the rest cure, he finds large part on moral methods of obtaining confidence, ensuring a childlike acquiescence in every needed measure. So while the use of many nicknames throughout the story are like very childlike, it still ensures like a child parent, child doctor, child patient, doctor patient relationship that just kind of stems away for me personally. Again, all marriages are different, but this one, it doesn't feel like a marriage at all. It just seems like this man is verbally oppressing this woman because in the beginning, I have to note, I'm going back and forth from other quotes. She talks about how she feels personally, I disagree with their ideas. Personally, I believe that congenial work with excitement and change would do me good. But what is one to do? So she knows that maybe if she goes outside, she kind of argues against staying in this yellow wallpaper, in this room with the yellow wallpaper. And it's like, hey, maybe I can stay on the first floor where all the garden is, like the flowers are. Maybe I can get my mind better if I go on a walk. And her husband is just like, why are you getting into such fancies? I know what's best for you. You're getting better. Sleep after she just slept for like 60 hours, you know? Makes no sense. So now we get into the isolation. She starts talking about this wallpaper that she just despises oh so much. It is dull enough to confuse the eye in following, pronounced enough to constantly irritate and provoke study. And when you follow the lame, uncertain curves for a little distance, they suddenly commit suicide, plunge off at outrageous angles, destroy themselves in unheard of contradictions. She's really essentially just projecting her own mental landscape onto this yellow wallpaper because how they plunge off at outrageous angles, destroy themselves in unheard of contradictions. She's gonna essentially be destroying herself in these contradictions because she has to stick and stay stuck in this wallpaper, in this room with this wallpaper, looking at these designs and looking at these curvatures and everything because that's all that she's supposed to be doing. She's not even supposed to be writing about this yellow wallpaper to begin with, but what better way to look at this wallpaper than to also write about it and to also think about it? Because that's the only thing she's limited to be doing in this entire thing. And no one thought to think, like, putting her in this room, maybe it's not the best idea for her. But, trial and error, of course. Women were conditioned to a narrative that is kind of rather patriarchal and deprives them of free and independent thought. So, the amount of times that this woman has been like, I hate this wallpaper. You can read in the story, she talks about how much she hates this wallpaper. It's like, hey, could you change this wallpaper? I don't like looking at it. I don't like staring here. Can I be in a different room? Can we renovate it? Can we do something so I don't have to look at this wallpaper all day? And the husband's just like, don't indulge in yourself in such fancies. You are the only person to get yourself out of this. And that's literally what she's trying to do. So he is gaslighting this woman until her ultimate demise. So, fun fact though, our girl Charlotte Perkins Gilman has a knowledge in design, which I think is what made more inspiration for this yellow wallpaper story because she attended the Rose Island School of Design in 1878 selling artworks for advertising trading cards. So just like her, she's also an advertising girl. Look at that. So we're going to get into the understanding of it more. She starts to gain a sense of connection with the wallpaper after having to stare in it. And like I mentioned before, that knowledge and design. Sorry, I've got my story right here, so I have to flip. I have to flip to certain quotes. Good thing that I annotated them. I'm getting so old. I really love annotating. I know a little of the principle of design, and I know this thing was not arranged on any laws of radiation or alteration, or repetition or symmetry, or anything else that I ever heard of. It is repeated, of course, by the breaths, but not otherwise. Looked at in one way, each breath stands alone, the bloated curves and flourishes, a kind of debased Romanesque with delirium tremens, go waddling up and down in isolated columns of fatuity. Those columns of fatuity, she just is just saying that they have no meaning. They don't mean anything. So at this point now, when she's looking at all of these breaths and these flats and these designs and everything, she starts to see a certain figure. She starts to actively believe that there is a woman inside of this wallpaper, or many women, rather, behind, and sometimes only one, and she crawls around fast, and her crawling shakes it all over. She starts to believe that just like those people, the women in the wallpaper, she is also trapped in this wallpaper. So she realizes this understanding that she has a duty to take down this wallpaper. And she realizes now, besides, I don't want anyone to get that woman out at night by myself, but myself. And that's how we get, whoops, that's how we get into a little checkpoint. Hope you guys are good. Um, Sitting here talking about literature, and it's very fun. And it's important to understand that because this story has something to do with mental health, there is still so much at work today with mental health because we live in a generation now, my generation included, is the very first to actively live alongside big technology, and technology is only going to be getting better from here. And it's important for us to navigate how it impacts our lives because it can really make our mental very it just disintegrate. It's just everything under the sun. And it's best to understand and find ways that you use it in your time. If you're someone who is like myself in advertising and public relations, someone who is going to be working in social media alongside the trends, alongside everything, you have to understand and find a perfect balance of what it does for you. So instead of looking all these like over like stimulating things like TikTok, because you have to realize it's not normal to just be on your phone, right? And you open TikTok. You open TikTok, there's someone you know, having a fun time doing a get ready with me. And then the next, you get someone who's talking about Palestine. And it's your levels are just going like this the whole day when you're looking at it. It's almost like an EKG if you think about it. It's like an EKG for your mental. And it's you're going through all of these different emotions and it's not normal at all. And you have to understand the best thing to do, some people completely cleanse themselves of social media. And if that's not in your cards for you, because like I said, I'm someone who has to be in media. That's my job. That's my interest. That's my fascination. Find things that enrich your mind more than just making it stagnant, than just getting that dopamine fix. Because if you're sitting here on TikTok and just looking at these things, it's not really benefiting you in the slightest at all. Maybe find a nice little niche video essay like this one and find videos that you find interest in yourself. Like if you're someone who loves film, maybe start getting into movies on movie depictions, movie video essays. If you like animation, like myself, and you want to see different animation styles and how those are created, all those things, you want to start getting into your interests and start researching things. Those are very fun things to do because you're adding more skill set to the things that you already like. And hopefully that helped because there's just so much instant gratification that people get from social media, and we just often forget how much that just puts us in such a big rabbit hole and we can hardly get ourselves out of. So yeah, that's the end of the checkpoint. Whoopsies. Here we go. I did say I was gonna close read, but I'm just gonna paraphrase it because it's a lot to read. So the ownership and freedom. Nearing the end, she gets up and realizes that she needs to get these women out. She needs to free herself and this woman out of this yellow wallpaper. So she realized one quote says, I didn't realize for a long time what the thing was that showed behind that dim sub pattern, but now I'm quite sure it is a woman. I pulled and she shook. I shook and she pulled. She's going back and forth with the wallpaper at this point. And before morning, we had peeled off yards of that paper, a strip about as high as my head and half around the room. And then when the sun came and the awful pattern began to laugh at me, I declared I would finish it today. Finishing it, meaning she was going to completely tear down the wallpaper herself. So then she gets to, then I peeled off all the paper I could reach standing on the floor. It sticks horribly and the pattern just enjoys it. All those strangled heads and bulbous eyes and waddling fungus growths and shriek with derision. I'm getting angry enough to do something desperate. Jump out the window would be admirable exercise, but the bars are too strong even to try. The windows, also for context, are barred. So what she does, she locks herself inside of this room, throws out the key, and when her husband comes and it starts to get into the door, like, my darling, what's going on? My dear, my darling, my sweetums. She's like, the key's outside. She's gone. She's mentally, she's not here anymore because like I mentioned before, she's ripping down this wallpaper with this woman, which you can argue could have been her reflection. It could have been something that she made in her head, some sort of schizophrenia. It's all up for interpretation, and it's pretty ambiguous. So when she starts to take down the wallpaper, she starts to mimic the motions that she saw in the woman. So she's like pressing her shoulder against the wallpaper and tracing it around the room. And when, her husband finally comes in, because she says, and then I said it again several times very gently, saying specifically, "Oh, the key is down by the front steps under a plantain leaf." She keeps saying that very gently and slowly, and said it so often that he had to go and see. And he got it, of course, and came in. He stopped by short by the door. "What is the matter?" he cried. "For God's sake, what are you doing?" I kept on creeping just the same, but I looked at him over my shoulder. "I've got out at last," said I, "in spite of you and Jane." Now, we don't know who Jane is. We can maybe guess that Jane is her, that's her name. Maybe it's a woman that, she found out had an affair with John. We don't know. This is the first time we hear this name, Jane. So it's really up to everyone's interpretation, but I think everyone has just kind of accepted the fact that Jane is our main character. Uh, and I pulled off most of the paper so you can't put me back. Now, why should that man have fainted? But he did. And right across my path by the wall so that I had to creep over him every time. So the story ends with our main character actively looking around and crawling over her husband in this shredded room with a shredded wallpaper. So, our main character, like I mentioned earlier, thanks to modern medicine, was going through what we say now is postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis. Mom mentions their child once, and she mentions their child once. So the child in question is mentioned twice in the story. And on top of that, the wall with the room with the yellow wallpaper was essentially their nursery. And she stays in there. She's like, you know what? This would be terrible for her baby. I'm glad my baby is okay. And again, this story is semi autobiographical. It's not exactly Charlotte's story, but it is similar. And all of the things going through her mind were parallel to what our main character, Jane, maybe, is what she was going through. And her intention to make this story was to drive people, not to drive people crazy, but to save people from being driven crazy. And it worked because she was told that the great specialist being Dr. Mitchell, had admitted to his friends of his that he had altered his treatment of neurasthenia, sorry, since reading the yellow wallpaper. And it's very important because in this story, the yellow wallpaper, in short, is a semi autobiographical story about a woman who succumbs to her own mental disintegration and succumbs to her own mental landscape and why it is what it is now. So she just she went through she just basically went through postpartum depression and psychosis because these are conditions that ultimately result in new moms and current moms who just gave birth with a drop in hormones like estrogen and progesterone and are intensified by the two experiences of either new parenthood or parenthood in general, and sleep deprivation because when you have a child, sleep schedule is all over the place, and anxiety. So that is what she was going through. Now, things to think about in this story. Could this argue that the longer you expose yourself to something, the more you appreciate it? How long until you break out of a forced proximity? So, if you were locked in this room, just like our main character, how long would you last? Would you last like maybe an hour, 2 weeks, a month? Who knows? With nothing, by the way, but maybe a secret diary like our main character. And what is your wallpaper? What consumes you to a point where you feel like I've looked at it so long, I understand this now, I need to break myself from it. So, thank you. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, Put them in the comment section below. If you like more video essays like this, let me know. And there'll probably be more. I hope you enjoyed. Have fun. Please be mindful of all the things that you watch on social media. Everything is so much bigger now, and it's important that we continuously try to keep our minds at bay so no one else does. I'll see you soon. Love you. Bye.